Hello, and welcome to the Crazy Stupid Love panel at the North Texas Teen Book Festival 2021. We're so excited to be here with you. I'm so excited that North Texas Teen Book Festival is going on in 2021. Even though we can't all be together in Irving, Texas, the way that we would all love to be, it's such an incredible festival every year. So excited to be here. My name is Sarah Ennie. I am the author of Tell Me Everything, and I'm also the host of the podcast First Draft with Sarah Ennie, where I talk to writers of all kinds, including a lot of the amazing YA and Kid Lit authors who are at this festival this weekend. And I'm so thrilled to be joined by the authors we have today. I can't wait to get in and ask everybody questions. But first, let's do introductions. So I'm going to call on you guys one by one and have you introduce yourselves, show us your book, and talk about the book that you're here to promote. And then we'll do questions. So why don't we start with Maria?
Hello, I'm so excited to be here with all of you. I am Maria Andrew, as Sarah just referenced. I'm the author of Love in English, and I'm going to be talking about that, and also the Secret Side of Empty, which is my previous book. Love in English is the story of Ana, who's a girl who comes to the U.S. from Argentina, like my parents did, and doesn't speak much English. So it's about what that experience is like. And I also didn't speak English as a kid when I came over, and so there's some of anyone who loves language, there's some observations of like, why is English? Why bow, but then enough, but then, rough. It's such a confusing language to learn. And then it's intertwined with a love story. So there's kissing and there's, high school fun. So it's a little bit of both.
I love that. Excellent. Thank you, Maria. Elise, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Elise Bryant, and I am a debut author. So I'm very humbled and excited to be here with some of my idols. It's crazy. So my debut novel just came out in January. It's called Happily Ever After. And it is a YA rom-com about a teen romance author named Tessa Johnson, who decides to make her life into one of the love stories she used to write in order to help cure her writer's block.
Yay, excellent. Thank you, Elise. And Sharon, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Sharon Flake. I've been to the festival before, so I'm happy to be back. My new novel is The Life I'm In. For people who know me, this is a follow-up to The Skin I'm In, the book people have been asking for 20 something years. It's the story about Charlize Jones, who was the antagonist in the first book. So we get to see her in a whole different light. Charlize is at the point where she's looking at herself and wanting to make some different choices. So it becomes a book about redemption and second chances, right? About following what you want, but getting sort of a little lost along the way. It's about human trafficking. So we see Char sort of loving herself and being 16 and still needing some guidance from adults, right? But I'm thrilled to have this book out, thrilled that people are looking forward to it and writing back to me saying how happy they are. They're laughing with her, they're crying with her, they're celebrating her as she goes from sort of trauma to wholeness and healing. So again, I'm happy to be here, people.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome.
And Diana, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm so excited to be here, and I am also a debut author, so this is very exciting for me. I'm a teacher at North Seattle College in English and Humanities, and I'm here to promote my debut novel, which is in my background, but also here, Eris Apparently. And it's the first in the Daughters of the Dynasty series, which follows the descendants of Empress Wu Zetian, who was the first actually the only ruler of China in her own right. And this book, Eris Apparently, is a contemporary novel, and it follows a young teen Chinese American actress who gets her big break as the lead role in a retelling of M. Butterfly. But the only problem is that it is being filmed in Beijing, which is the one place her parents have forbidden her to go to. In fact, it's their big, huge do not break rule, and she has no idea why she can't go. But of course she does, and what follows is a summer of romance and love and secrets and family. And that is the book.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Jennifer, would you please introduce yourself for us?
Yes, I am Jennifer Niven. I'm so happy to be here. It's one of my absolute favorite book festivals. I'm the author of All the Bright Places on Holding Up the Universe, and my latest is Breathless. And it's a story about a girl named Claude Henry who's 18 years old, and she has the floor just disappear from beneath her feet when her parents announce they're separating. She 5 days after high school graduation, moves to this remote island off the coast of Georgia with her mother, and it's the summer of first. She meets a boy, she has sex for the first time, and it's a very personal story. It's personal in that I went through the very same thing as Claude did when I was 18, and then I also met my husband while I was writing this book. So there's like double the romance because I went to this island to write this story about Claude and Jeremiah Crew and the summer of first. And then I met my husband and we fell in love that first day. And a lot of the adventures we had, I wrote into the book.
That is amazing. Thank you so much. And Renee, would you please introduce yourself for us?
Hi, everyone. I am so honored to be on this panel with beloved authors, and congrats to the debut authors as well. I am talking about Love is a Revolution, which is my latest YA about a girl named Nala. She lives in Harlem, and she pretends to be an activist to get the attention of a guy who is an activist. And in the process of telling some little, not so little lies to him, she realized that she really needs to be true to herself. And if she's going to love him, she has to first love herself. So it is a book that is romance and all of that, but it's also about self-love and love of community and love of family.
Amazing. Excellent. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you all today. And I want to start with a question that I found to be true for all of the books we're talking about. This is a panel about love. Of course, we are talking about romantic love and a lot of swoony moments, but I really want to talk about, well, all the kinds of love that's represented in all of your books as well. And that was kind of what struck me in preparing for this panel, was like thinking about some of the true lasting love stories that we all kind of remember. And many of them are marriage plots. I mean, I don't think I'm alone in having just watched all of Bridgerton. And there's a lot of like that women in those stories are often limited to who they end up with determines a lot about their lives. In contemporary fiction and the kinds of books that we're talking about today, there's so much more at play in these young women's lives, and there's so many more things that they need to deal with and integrate into their personalities. So I'd love to hear each of you how you balanced the love stories that are central to this with all of the things, both global and personal, that are going on in your main characters' lives. I'm going to kind of jump around and see who's ready to answer this question. But Jennifer, why don't we start with you, if you don't mind?
Great question. It's interesting because there's so many love stories in all of my books, but in Breathless, I think especially I've got the love story between friends, between Claude and her best friend Saz. I have the love story between Claude and her mother, and the love story between Claude and Jeremiah, and then the love story, the self-love that we're just talking about. It's that discovery that you can, when the floor disappears from beneath you, you can actually rebuild it. And I think as I was writing it, obviously we were going through, something in this world with the pandemic, and it felt I'd already, had the plot for it, but I really related to it all over again with everything that was happening in the world, and that sense of the world's just suddenly like disappeared from beneath our feet. We have to find our way, rebuild the floor or build a new one, and kind of discover what the world is about. And it was really interesting to have that experience while writing this particular story about a girl who has to learn to not just rebuild a floor beneath her feet, but build a whole new one and discovering who she is.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And Maria, would you like to talk about balancing all of the different things at play in your young character's life?
Yeah, for sure. When as you were giving us the question, where my mind went to immediately was the love and the hope that the immigrant story usually involves, right? So like in Love and English and in my own life, the protagonist was separated from her dad. The dad came ahead, and they were separated for a while. I was separated from my dad while my mom and I were outside of the country, and this like pull to be reunited, and this pull to, like, the whole reason that people emigrate to another place is for love, or for love of family, for the desire to make something new and different and hopefully better. And so I think there's a lot of that threaded through. I hope at least there's a lot of that threaded through the story, of like all of the love that makes people make a choice which can be painful and can be isolating, and to leave family behind, but to go somewhere, to build something. So that if there's a secondary love story in Love and English, I'd like to think that it's the love that causes people to like try to make their way in another place. So
Yeah, I love that. That's excellent. Well put. And Renee, do you want to take a crack at this?
Sure. So I was thinking about Nala falling in love with herself. And first and foremost, so all the other relationships are kind of secondary to her relationship with herself. She doesn't know that, but she's figuring that out, that she really needs to take care of herself, and then she can show up for other people. So I was thinking about the ways in which we love our families, our friends, our neighborhoods. She's really afraid of not being the good enough activist. And what does it mean to show up for your community and to prove that you're down for the cause? And she's not the one to make a big speech. She's not the one to do kind of the more performative acts of activism, but she visits her grandmother, and she's, very thoughtful in how she interacts with her friends. And so she's thinking about, how do we show love in small ways? And does it always have to be really big, or can it be just the way that we talk to each other every day and hang out and spend time? And so she's thinking about love on the smaller level as well as the big capital L love too.
I love that. Yeah, I think we've all been doing a lot of thinking about how just being together in person turns out is a big way to show love, right? And we're all eager to get back to that. Sharon, I'd love to hear from you about how you balance that in your story.
Human trafficking is not an easy story to tell. But we see love sprinkled throughout this novel. First of all, Charlize's love for home, right? She's has to leave because her sister feels like, if I send you south, maybe grandma can help you become a better person. So through the whole book, no matter what happens to her, her compass is set on home. Where her parents were once alive and they loved her and they took care of her. And she just believes, if I could just get back home, right, things will be better for me. And for people who read The Skin I'm In and who loved the protagonist there, it was Malika Madison. Well, Malika shows up today in this book, and boy, did she show up, right? She has set boundaries for herself, which is a form of self-love. But she also reaches across the aisle and holds Char's hand when she is traumatized the most. And when Char can't sort of save herself, doesn't have the ability at this point, it's Malika who sits down, who sort of pounds on the door, who sort of says, I will not leave you in this state. Even at 16 and 17 years old. And then there's her teacher, Miss Saunders from the first book, who shows up again and shows that a teacher, many of them are committed beyond 3 o'clock, right? So she shows up in a mighty way for her again, for love for Char, love for teaching, love for students, and this sense that love for humanity. So you have all those different levels in the book, and I'm excited to be the author and to usher it into the world.
Oh, that's excellent. Very, very well put. Diana, I'd love to hear from you about balancing. There's a lot going on in your book. How did you find a balance between all of those things?
I was just thinking that. I don't know if I did, first of all, because as you say, there was a lot going on in my book. But one thing I was thinking of is that Gemma, my main character, she's an actress and she is confronting so much of Hollywood racism and ideas of what Asian American women, young women are supposed to be like. And she has to fight against these tropes that she finds in Hollywood. But she's 18, she's a new actress, she doesn't know how to do it. And I thought a lot about the kinds of romance tropes where oftentimes it's about conflict. And I love enemies to lovers, but I want to write a different kind of relationship, a quieter romance where it's about supporting each other. It's about helping each other figure out who they are rather than changing the other person into who they think they want. And so I feel that the romance in this book is, it almost takes a back seat to Gemma's story as she goes into the world, as she figures out who her family is, as she figures out the choices her family made to protect her and the secrets that they're keeping from her, and how to stand up for herself and how to find her voice in being an actress and saying, you know, this is me being true to myself, and how her love interest is there to back her up. He's not there to provide more conflict or more drama, but it's about his role is to be support for her. And then that relationship, I think, is very different from the kind of relationships I'm often drawn to. So it was interesting to write it that way.
I love that. Yeah, that is so well put. I love that he's there to support and help her discover her true self, which is so fun. I want to ask Elise and Renee, in Happily Ever Afters and Love is a Revolution, your main characters, Tessa and Nala, make some kind of questionable decisions in the pursuit of love. There's some kind of structures that they put onto their behavior in the pursuit of what they think is the romance of their life, right? And it works until it doesn't. So I'd love to hear you talk about, you know, the shapes that we kind of bend ourselves in pursuit of connection and secretly really just looking for validation, which, as you both talked about, then the characters can find in other ways. So we
Yeah.
can, go ahead, Elise.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, that's like one of the things I get so often from readers. They're like, why did Tessa do that? What was she doing? And you know, it was on purpose. You know, she is a very messy character. She makes, like you said, she makes a lot of bad decisions. But I wanted to show that in a love story, and especially a love story with a Black girl as the main character, because so often in our society we expect, you know, Black girls to be perfect. They can't mess up. They have to be strong. You know, that's what's expected of us. And so through Tessa, I wanted to show her making the worst decisions, messing up, being very self-centered at times, but also, you know, growing and learning to love herself and still being deserving of love through all of that, because we don't get that image of a Black girl enough in our, you know, our movies, our books, or anything. And that's why I loved Love is a Revolution too. I really think our books and our characters are kind of in conversation with each other. They're navigating this same journey.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I was trying to write a very human Black girl, right? And just thinking about, well, what does it mean to be 17 and trying to figure yourself out and falling in love, and the pressure from your friends and family members to be, you know, a good student, to know where you want to go to college already, to be an activist. Like, she has all these expectations that are put on her, and she's just trying to figure out, who does she want to be and who is she right now, you know? And I just, yeah, echo what was already said. I think that it's important for us to have realistic girls in realistic fiction. And sometimes we're writing the ideal girl. And I think that I wanted girls to see themselves in Nala, and to know that it's okay to make mistakes and be flawed, and that you still deserve grace, and you still deserve love, and you still deserve acceptance. And also, I mean, I think we all in some way, and Nala is extreme in what she does, but I do think there is a little bit of her in everyone, as far as like sometimes you're in a conversation and you don't agree with what's being said, but you kind of hold back and you're like, you read the room and you realize I'm the only one that's going to be on the opposite side, so let me just be quiet, right? Or you don't give that advice to a friend because you know she really doesn't want to hear it. And so there's times when we silence ourselves and we kind of, back up away from who we really are. And she does it to the extreme, but I think that's in all of us. And I just wanted to kind of play around with what that would look like in a romantic relationship. And I love what Diana said too about, so Ty is also to support her. Like he's not coming to save her, and she's not surprised that he likes her because she has several men in her life who have been healthy men and who have loved her and who care about her. So he doesn't come to save the day. And I was trying to be intentional about, yes, she gets the guy, but it's not like the greatest reward or the only good thing in her life. She has many good people in her life, not just Ty. And that was important too.
I love that. That's really well said. And Diana and Maria, your books are so the unique kind of challenge at play is there's a lot of cross-cultural romance and crossing languages. I'm thinking not only between the romantic partners, but also family and going on set in China has a lot of cultural challenges that the character faces. And I'd love to hear from you guys how you wanted to embrace that as part of the connection that your characters are making, and also how challenging it can be to put that on the page. You think a lot about kind of communicating non-verbally in those situations or things like that. So as a writer, I'd love to hear how you incorporated that. Oh, and we can start with Maria.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I thought about it a lot and I played with it a lot. And in some ways it was a lot of fun, to revisit the memory of what it was like to not speak English and how do you experience the world in a predominantly English speaking place when you're not, are you missing cues? Then you're self-conscious, like, am I getting everything? I remember sitting in the class because, so in Love and English, she's in an ESL class. And I like to tell people I wrote the ESL class I wish I had had because we were undocumented. So my parents were afraid of public school because they understood that meant you had to show residency, but they didn't understand it meant you had to show residency in the town to prove you could go to the school in the town, not in the country. And so they put me in this small parochial school that they couldn't afford. And so, no ESL class. So they just sort of plopped me into this class. And I remember sitting there thinking, the teacher's going on about whatever she's going on about. I have no idea. And I remember thinking, like, is this always how it's going to feel? I was small, you don't know, is this always going to be it? And so tapping back into that was both, obviously I speak English now. So it was a challenge to try to communicate it non-verbally and try to like remember what that feeling was like. But also I really tried to give the experience to the reader without alienating the reader. So there's a lot of Spanish in the book. There are times at which I do sort of leave it like, there are parts where she's hearing a dialogue in English and she doesn't pick up on words, and I just cross those words out. And so if the reader is sort of left guessing like, but what did the other person just say? Like, that's to make the reader experience, well, that's how our protagonist is feeling. And so, yeah, I played with that balance of both trying to show the experience, but also, bringing the reader along, because I don't want to make anyone feel excluded, like they don't know what's going on. So.
Yeah, I thought it was so artful that within the text itself, you were playful with how to make the reader really in the experience. And that's, I think, something that, I think YA is great for that. There's a lot of experimentation on the page and showing text messages and all this stuff. We can kind of, and our audience is really willing to go along with it. So I thought that was really well done. How about you, Diana?
Yeah, I had almost the opposite challenge in that my character is Chinese American, but she's going back to, when I say going back to China, I always feel like that's not quite right either, because like me, Gemma is going to China as a young adult, and she's never been there before. So it's not really a homecoming in some ways, but in some ways there's this expectation that she's going to find her roots, find her belonging. And I was also a young adult when I went to China for the first time for different reasons. My parents didn't have a big, you shall not go to Beijing rule, but for a lot of reasons, it was a while before I went to China. And it was this feeling of, okay, I'm going to find my people, I'm going to belong, and this is who I am, because it was something I've always wanted, because I never felt like I quite fit into the US. So then when I landed in Beijing, like Gemma, it didn't happen. That magical moment of I belong didn't happen because I did not grow up there. All the cultural norms were different. Chinese people saw me as a foreigner. They could tell I was a foreigner from the way I dressed, even before I spoke and even before they heard my accent. And it was this very lonely feeling. So I wanted to capture that for Gemma, but also because, you know, it's a love story. I wanted to give her her happily ever after as well, and to have her find the connection and the family and that sense of belonging she had been seeking.
Yeah, I love that. And that is kind of how I thought your two books were in conversation, was kind of a little bit of opposites playing with how the outsider experience feels from both the traveler and the travelee, I guess. Sharon and Jennifer, I wanted to talk to both of you. Have Jennifer, your previous book, All the Bright Places, was a massive, huge book. I feel like everyone was reading, and now it's a Netflix movie, which is like, everyone should go watch that later. It was such a beautiful movie. And Sharon, The Skin I'm In was the recipient of the Coretta Scott King John Steptoe Award, and is a constant presence on school reading lists. And it was just given a reissue with a foreword by Jason Reynolds. So much exciting stuff about these previous efforts. And now, Sharon, you're back with a sister book to that book. And Jennifer, you're releasing a book that a lot of fans of your previous work are going to be excited about. I just would love to hear how you got into these worlds and maybe tried to block out outside expectations, or did you think about that as you were writing? Or what do you think fans will be happy about this, or new fans? From a writer, I'm so interested in how you thought about all of that stuff. Let's start with Jennifer.
I think that, you know, for me, I try to block that out, because I mean, I wrote Holding Up the Universe right after All the Bright Places. And it was a little difficult, I think, to block that out, because I was also touring for All the Bright Places. I mean, I toured for like 5 years. So I was writing on the road. As I was talking about All the Bright Places, I was having to then go back and work on Holding Up the Universe. So it was difficult. But I also, one thing I do is I create playlists for my characters and for the books. And so it's a way, and it became really critical with Holding Up the Universe, because it's a way that I could block out Finch and Violet, and I could focus on Jack and Libby and their voices. And that's something that I've carried with me forward. With Breathless, again, I tried to shut it out. As my mother was also an author, and she always said, you know, you can't write with someone over your shoulder, and it's very true. And I try to write the story that's in me to write, that is burning in me to write. But I write for the readers, not in a way that they are pressuring me, but a way that they mean so much to me. And I always tell them they're my brightest places, which is so true. So I write it's like a love story. Each book is a love story for my readers, to my readers. And it's something in me that I have to write. So it's a long jumbled way of saying I try to shut that out as much as I can, because these new characters deserve that. And, you know, they deserve my whole attention. And I'm so grateful for All the Bright Places in particular, because it gave me a wonderful audience of readers. And with Breathless, you know, it's I think I wrote a little more mature story. It's even probably skews older than All the Bright Places. So it's not only for the readers who have grown with me, but it's for new readers, hopefully, as well.
Yeah, I love that. That's excellent. And Sharon, I mean, you are a direct follow-up. Well, you call it a sister book. So I'd love to hear about deciding to come back to it and how you re-engaged with these well-loved characters.
Thank you. Gosh, I always said I would never write a follow-up book. You know, there are over 1 million copies of The Skin I'm In. It's sold and read on 6 continents. It's coming out in Italian, I think, this year. And so people love it. Teachers walk up to me a lot of times crying about the impact the book has had on their students. And so I said I would never do it. But I decided for a lot of reasons I was going to do it. But when I first couple of drafts, guess what? I left Malika and the teacher out, the first draft. It was my editor that said, "No, everybody loves them. You have to put them in." I was afraid. I was afraid that I wouldn't get them right, which is why I never wanted to do it in the first place, right? The whole book. But then with The Life I'm In, you know, the second draft, I put them in, but they were just sprinkled in real quick, you know, and not too much. And my editor said the same thing, "Sharon." And I'm so glad she did, because it became a book about obviously human trafficking and other things, having that relationship with Malika. You end up with these sisters relationship, right? That love relationship between friends. And when Charlize is in the house, the love relationship between her and the other girls. So it also becomes a book about girls helping and supporting other girls. How did I get to this? I never know where I'm going in the novel. With The Skin I'm In, I only knew that I wanted to write about a dark-skinned girl. So I sort of hop on the bus, I start writing. In The Skin I'm In, on the 3rd page, a girl is being bullied. In The Life I'm In, it was a little bit different, but I pretty much did the same thing. I did interview a person, people that were trafficked, but I was 3/4 into the book when I did that. So obviously I had to go back, and that impacted some parts of the story, but I wanted to be able to have those people tell me what that story was and not have other people's lives tell me what that story was. So that's sort of how I went about that. I learned to love Shar. So just like readers went from, in the first book, not a lot of people like Shar. So then you make her the protagonist, right? You have to like her. So I had to find a way in too. And part of that is she becomes a caretaker, she colors, and letting people see her humanity and reminding people that Shar is a teenager, right? Hey guys, this is a kid. Young people make a host of mistakes. That's where redemption and forgiveness comes in, not in just the book, but in our terms of working and meeting with young people and reading about them. And I love what Renee is saying, and I'll make this real quick. I'm hearing this a lot by authors, especially Black authors, about grace, about giving young Black children grace and space to be children. So it was an interesting ride for me. And I think it'll be The Life I'm In will be an interesting read for my audience. And like, I also wrote for people who are, right, who want to see the book, who haven't, who grew up on the book. So that was a challenge too, writing for people who are 16, 17, 14, and 37.
Yeah, exactly. I think all of you guys have reached a broad audience, and then over time you kind of realize, oh, I'm writing for definitely not just teenagers anymore. um, yeah, and thank you for speaking to that, Sharon. I think lately I've been doing. I mean, we all write contemporary fiction, so there's a lot of thought put into likable characters and whether that should even be a part of the conversation. I would argue maybe no, maybe we don't need to use that terminology anymore. And I am glad that there are so many more complicated and complex and lovable in their own ways characters out in the world. Um, you have all so far brought up something that I'm so glad I want to jump in and talk about, which is the role of teachers and teaching and mentorship. This is something I've been talking to a lot of people and thinking about so much lately. Some of you here are teachers. Jennifer, you mentioned your mom was a writer, so you kind of grew up with like a writing mentor in the home. I would love to hear from all of you just about if you are teachers or if you've been with teachers, how that impacts your writing. Also, like how you think about mentors in your books and how your characters find people to help guide them through these difficult times. And and how that interplays with their self-discovery. Really big, broad questions, but whatever you guys have to say about the role of teachers and mentoring, I'd love to hear. So again, we'll jump in one by one. I'm going to start with Elise because I just got to talk to her about teaching for a lot on my podcast. So I'd love to hear her thoughts on that.
Okay, yeah. So I was a teacher for almost 9 years. And I don't think I would be here if I hadn't taught. I grew up writing. I grew up writing these, fluffy, swoony love stories like what Happily Ever Afters is now. But I kind of like, I actually went to an art school where I had, I had writing teachers. And I kind of through that process absorbed this message that like the stories that I wanted to write weren't true literature or real literature. So it was because of like my peers and my teachers in that setting where I felt like, this is not for me. I'm not cut out for this. But I ended up teaching middle school and high school in South LA, and I found that so many of my students, they would come and they would say like, I hate writing, or I hate books, I hate reading. And it became like this challenge, which I've talked to Sarah about on her podcast, of trying to find like, well, they hate reading, but I need to find the books that, that they will like, And so through that process is how I really discovered YA and what it is right now. Reading books by Nick Stone and Andy Thomas and Jason Reynolds and Renee Watson and Sharon Flake and all these books that I got for my students, and then going through all these books, I started to think like, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could start writing again, because a lot of my students were asking specifically for, joyful stories, funny stories with Black and brown kids, falling in love. And so that's when I really started writing again. I would come home from my teaching job and try and put all these stories on paper, not just my story, but so many of my students' stories, what they wanted to read. So yeah, I attribute this book and where I am now to just my love for my students and wanting to make something that they would enjoy. And now I get to send it to them too, which has been so wonderful. I sign it Mrs. Bryant, and they like send me pictures like, look, Miss, I saw your book at Target. So that's been very cool.
Oh, that's so special. I love that. Thank you, Elise. And Diana, I was thinking about you with this question because I know you currently teach creative writing, not necessarily to kids, and you also you were part of the mentorship program through We Need Diverse Books, which is like such a wonderful thing that they're offering to authors. So I'd love to hear about your experiences kind of on both sides of that equation.
Thank you. I love talking about We Need Diverse Books because they are such an amazing organization. And I was so lucky, so lucky to get that 2019 mentorship with Swati Avashti. I would not be here now if I hadn't had that mentorship. I went through an MFA. I had a very similar experience to Elise, where I loved young adult books. I love fantasy. I love romance. I loved sci-fi. But I went through a graduate MFA program where the message was very much write true literature. And they were very, very clear what true literature was. And it was not the books I loved. So not only did I stop writing the books I loved, I stopped reading the books I loved. And because I was going on to be an English professor, I felt that there was a path that was set for me. But when I started teaching creative writing to my students, they got the same message from other creative writing teachers. You will only write true literature. So in my class, I was like, that's ridiculous. Write whatever you want. I can't help you with horror at all. That is not my genre, but you write it. And that is great. And then it just kind of dawned on me, why did I not give myself permission to write what I want? So I did. And but I didn't really know how at that point. I had gone so long from my love of young adult and middle grade books, but I started reading them again, and I found so much more diversity in those books than when I was a child. And then Swati's mentorship was just phenomenal. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested in, finding mentors as a grown-up. This is where I've been thinking a lot about lately is that we don't talk about those relationships as adults too much. But I think that what we're all here doing, right, this entire festival is a big experience of it is writers finding each other and being able to connect. I would just love to hear about how that shaped your book or thinking about the roles within the book itself.
Yeah, there's a very crucial relationship in the book between Gemma and an older Chinese American director, Eileen Dan, and she's the one who pushes her and says, I don't know how to fix this script. You see something wrong with it, and you need to speak up and say what it is. And Gemma is someone who is she's like many of my students. She's very savvy around race and sexuality in a way that I was not when I was her
Mm.
age. So I think of Eileen Den as someone who wants to do right by Gemma, but doesn't have the savvy or the knowledge or understanding that Gemma does as a young person in this time period, in this contemporary time. So it's Gemma who has to fight against the homophobia in the script, the assumptions about Asians in the script, and she has to stand up and make those changes. But she wouldn't have been able to without Eileen Dan's support. And she wouldn't have been able to without her own connection to family and seeing these strong women making choices in the way they have. So I do think that mentorships as adults are just as important. And mentorships are important no matter where you are in your life.
I agree. Yes. Maria, I'd love to talk. You mentioned earlier about having an ESL class that you wish you had had. I'd love to hear about how teachers and mentors would play a role in your work.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely had a lot of fun writing Mr. T, who is the ESL teacher. He was nearly all wish fulfillment. Just that fun, little irreverent teacher that I would have loved to have had. And then as I was thinking through the question too, the role that teachers and mentors have played in my life. I really came on. I did not have an ESL teacher like Mr. T, or really a teacher like Mr. T. He's young. It's his first year teaching it. He kind of goes off book, so to speak, and does his own thing and does these wacky things, which I'm not even 100% sure he'd get away with in an actual school, but it's fun. It's a fun setup in the book. But for me, I mean, I also would not be here if it wasn't for just some of the remarkable teachers that I had. I'm thinking in particular of my English teacher in high school, who I'd always loved books. I'd always been, I started reading in Spanish, and then when I learned English, reading is a gateway in when you can't quite communicate verbally, but you've mastered the language written. There's a great feeling there. So they've always been my refuge, but by the time I was in high school and I was, like reading proficiently, and my high school teacher just took it to another level. She was fantastic. I had her, it was a small school, like I said, so I had her 2 years. 1 year I had her for 2 classes. Miss Bordiga, who has passed away unfortunately since, but she just could make everything amazing. Like she would do voices and the characters and puppets, and we'd all sit there like, we're too cool for this, but show me some more of that, and like she would just kind of get us, and she was fantastic. And so she brought the written word alive for me in such a way that that was sort of the time that I began to think like, I'd love to do this. I mean, fast forward, clearly it took a while past high school to make the dream happen, but I'd like to think that she really seeded the dream by just being awesome. So yeah, teachers can really make a life, can change a life incredibly.
That's amazing. I
And
love that.
librarians too. Shout out to librarians too.
Yes, absolutely. Renee, I know you've been a teacher, an educator, and passionate about mentorship in your professional life. I'd love to hear from you about this.
Sure. I've had amazing teachers my whole life. Even in elementary school, all through college, I've always had at least one, but in many cases, more than one, that saw the gift of writing in me and kind of fanned the flame and encouraged me to write, to submit my work, to take myself serious as a writer. They always would say something to the effect of like, yeah, you might not be a published author yet, but you are a writer, you are writing, you are creating. And there was something about that that allowed me to own the word writer, and that, and to really show up in the world as a writer long before any, book deals or anything like that. And so I'm so grateful for teachers who really see their students like pass the assignment and really nurture them and encourage them to be who they were put on this earth to be. I always say I wouldn't be here without the support of and the nurturing from my mother and the teachers in my life. And then also thinking about mentorship, I think about how the women in my life always, I mean, there were just women sitting on their porches looking out for me, the women in the church who I always thought were, a little nosy, always in the business, but I'm so grateful for them because they would not let me falter. They were there to say, no, that boy is not good for you. Nope, come over here. He don't need your number. I see what he's trying to do. Or, yeah, you should really try out for that. You should get into that. They'd introduce me to other people who they knew would be good friends for me. And so I've always had women looking out for me. And in the book, Nala, it's summertime, so she's not in school. So in a lot of my books, you'll see there's some teachers and I'm kind of giving homage to from my actual teachers, but it's summertime for her. So she's getting a lot of her mentoring from her grandmother. And I wanted to have this intergenerational exchange of women being together, learning from each other, leaning on each other, giving each other advice, because that was so crucial in my life. I have always had older women pouring into me, and I did not always appreciate it when I was a child, but the older I get, I look back on those days, I'm so grateful. And I say a lot to students, or even to people who want to be writers, who are looking for a mentor. Write us. Like I remember writing Nikki Grimes a letter through her website when my first book came out. I was a baby and I did not know what I was doing, and I loved her work. And so I just was like, hey, I have some questions. Can I ask you them? And she was so gracious and let me ask her these questions. And that's how our relationship started, right? And so I highly recommend just reaching out to folks who you want to get to know, who you feel like you're like-minded with. Most of us, if we have time, we'll respond because someone did that for us. So that's just kind of the writing community. And also my mentors are people who I don't know. Maya Angelou, Gwendolyn Brooks, Lucille Clifton, they mentored me through their writing, and actually just reading and studying their work, I feel made me the writer who I am. So yeah, I attribute all of me to all the amazing women who are in my life.
That's incredible. Thank you. I love that so much. Sharon, I'd love to hear about, it's so unique. You've had so much experience in schools and speaking with educators and librarians. And I know you did a lot of mentorship work in your younger life as well. But in the book, Shar she, as you say, she becomes a caretaker, and there's an interesting kind of learning by doing process that she's a part of. I'd love to hear about how that factors into the novel.
Like I said, I wanted Charlize. I had to find a way in for myself, and I had to find a way in for readers so that they would understand that she had compassion, she had kindness, she had self-sufficiency, right? Because of the home she grew up in, it's easy to judge that home and feel like nothing good happened there. But when she's on her own for a while, you get to see that she knows how to take care of herself better than many adults. Is she making mistakes? Yes, my God, she's making mistakes. And then there's some interesting people that sort of pop up along the way that help her on her journey, right? She doesn't get to even survive this whole trip without people who reach out to her, whether you will call them neighbors or mentors, who speak into her life and give her a little something along her journey. For me, I don't feel like I had a lot of mentors in life beyond what Renee said, if you want to call grandmothers and neighbors and things like that. So we can call them mentors. And in high school and middle school, like I didn't write. I didn't have any skills, people. You all did, but I didn't. Kids look at me and they feel sorry for me when I say that. I'm like, oh no, I don't think I had any skills. I went to college, and that's how I figured out I could write, and one college professor was very helpful. Mostly in a class that when I look back at my journal now, I'm like, she let me write that. Oh my God. I look on those pages, you think I was going to start the revolution? It was going to happen tomorrow, right? So that's one thing. But one mentor who has really been a friend is Tanya Bolden, who was a peer. And I've been telling people there were several years where I just was sort of stuck. And, Kanya and I became closer friends. And now that I think about it, I would say she writes historical fiction, historical nonfiction. One of her books is Saving Savannah, which is a series, and people should read it. It's incredible. But I just sat back and we talked a lot, politics and everything. And I you don't think that you might be mid-career needing a mentor, and sort of sat back and listened and say, oh, okay. I used to write like 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I wrote 7 books like that. Now, maybe I would have wrote 80 like Renee and the rest of you. But then with Tanya, I could see, oh, what, you write 5 hours a day? Oh, okay. And so you write 7 days a week? 15 years before that, I would say, that ain't happening. But I did, right? And it meant that I was producing work faster, right? In the terms of, does she have any impact on the life I'm in? No, because she didn't get to read that one. But what I sold before the life I'm in was, people don't know, a book and verse. And it was that book and verse that she read over and said, this part here, that part there, I think you're too long in the weeds over here, which was really helpful, because when I sold it, when I sent it to my editor, I sold that. And that was the book that I had said to God, if indeed this book does not sell, I am done with this business. Not as a threat to God, but sort of like, okay, if I don't do anything else but the skin I'm in, I'm good. And I had finally come to that term, right? And so I'm not sure it would have sold if she had not critiqued it for me. And also, having done that and sold it, it gave me my confidence back. Then I could do the life I'm in. And now the book and verse is probably coming out next year. And so is a third book to the life I'm in, which is going to be John's story. So you all are talking love. This is about a Black boy who is so in love with Malika. There's some other stuff that happens, but that's going to be that one too.
That's so exciting. Oh, and I think that is just so wise, what you just said about needing mentors, no matter what stage we're at. And, once you get older, you can start being a mentor, but that doesn't mean that you don't have any room to grow. That's for sure. And Jennifer, I mentioned your mom was also a writer. You also, Breathless is a summer book, so there is not so much of the traditional role of teachers or mentors in her life, but I'd love to hear about how that's still kind of a factor, and how that has been a role in your life as well.
First of all, I love hearing every single answer to this question. It's riveting, and I feel like I'm learning so much. So my mom, as I said, was a writer, and I'm an only child. And I think if she ever had any hope of getting writing time when I was growing up, she kind of put it into my childhood routine. So we would have writing time. She would write at her desk and I would write at mine. And I think one of the most beautiful things that mentors do is they help you believe in yourself, and they encourage you to believe in yourself because they believe in you. And I just, that kind of belief, I grew up, because of my mom, I grew up being fortunate enough to feel like I could do anything or be anything. And she definitely, she started writing professionally after she and my dad got divorced when I was 18 and she was in her 40s. And she just had this amazing career. She was also a teacher all her life. And she taught me so many wonderful things, and so many of them I've taken forward into my books. When I was 10, I remember we moved to Indiana from Maryland, and I was just completely devastated. And my mom had always encouraged me to just express my feelings on paper. And so I wrote one of my earliest books, which was called My Life in Indiana, or I Will Never Be Happy Again. And gave it to my parents, of course, so that they understood how upset I was. But it was the first time I really realized that you could pour yourself onto the page. And she was always so encouraging of that. Once she figured out telling stories was my favorite thing to do, she was just so supportive, and she would have been of anything that I'd wanted to do. But it was just a wonderful bond that we had with that, and all of the best writing advice I've ever heard, I got from her. And there's a love story in Breathless between Claude and her mother, and so much of that is kind of mimics the relationship that my mom and I had. All the Bright Places, she was my first reader for every single book. All the Bright Places is my 9th book, 8th book, 9th book, something like that. And it's the last book of mine she'll ever read because she died very suddenly and unexpectedly in 2014, just before the book came out. And I remember, talking about how we need mentors as adults. I remember feeling like that floor had disappeared from beneath my feet and feeling like, I don't know how to do this and any of it, life or writing or any of it, without my mom. And I had to learn to put a floor beneath my feet, and I had to learn to be my own mentor in a way. And then one of the things that has made me feel fill me up and make me feel stronger and better in the aftermath of her death has been my readers, and my readers who are writers. And my getting to mentor young readers is just, it's the biggest gift. And in situations like this, on wonderful panels with wonderful authors or talking to young authors, I get to share some of her writing advice. And so it's this wonderful kind of full circle that I feel very lucky to get to do.
That is amazing. Thank you so much. That's beautiful, and a tribute to the way your mom can continue to give back to so many other writers through how we all connect and all share our knowledge and what we learn with each other. Oh my gosh, you guys have been so amazing. I want to just wrap with one last audience question, and I'm going to treat it kind of like a lightning round. So I'll go to each of you guys and give a couple sentence answer. And this is another, I'm mad I didn't come up with this question because it's what writers always want to know. This is a question from, from Andrea at Pearson Middle School Library. Andrea wants to know, how did you decide the title of your book and who came up with it, or was it a group effort? Titles can be some of the hardest things or some of the easiest things. And everyone always wants to know where they come from. So I'm going to go round robin and do a lightning round to wrap up. Let's start with Diana.
My publishers actually came up with Eris apparently, but I love it because I love play on words.
I love that. Yes, it's such a great title. And Maria, how about you?
Yeah, so Love in English was not originally called Love in English. It was called just English. And after it sold at some point, I think it occurred to someone, this is going to maybe sound like a grammar textbook, are people going to know what this book is about? So it was a group effort talking, with the editor and just people at the publishing house. What are the two main themes in the book? It's love and it's English. And so Love in English that's how that was born.
Amazing. And Jennifer, how about you?
With Breathless, I knew that Claude in the book would, I wanted her to cut her hair as soon as she got to this island to do this drastic thing. And she's inspired by this movie that I've always loved called Breathless. It's a French movie from a long time ago, black and white movie with Jean Seberg. And I never named it in the book, but I have her watch that movie and get inspired to cut her hair off. And I also thought it's nice because it has a lot of different meanings. She's breathless over this love affair, but she's also feeling like the breath has been knocked out of her with the floor being pulled out from beneath her feet.
Mm-hmm. Love that. And that's a secret Easter egg for the book for all the audience members. Elise, how about you?
Yeah, the title, it came to me, I guess, when I was drafting one day. It's always been the title of the book. And the reason I liked it was because throughout the novel, Tessa is so hyper focused and thinking there's only one happily ever after for her, one thing that's going to make her happy, and that's falling in love with a certain boy. But over the course of the novel, she learns there are a lot of different kinds of love that is maybe more important, and there might be other boys that are better for her. So I liked the idea of like there are lots of different happy endings for people. And my second book, the companion novel, which comes out in January, is called One True Loves. The S at the end again.
Yay. Oh my gosh. I feel like that's also a breaking news here on this panel. It's amazing. Sharon, how about you?
The Skin I'm In was the publisher named that book, and The Life I'm In, a local writer, author friend here, gave me that title after going through so many titles. And so now, it's sort of the way I'll move forward with the next book will have sort of that same theme going through in it. So
it's nice to have a structure that you're not totally in the wilds on it. You can kind of stick to something.
Yeah.
And Renee, how about you?
So I came up with the title. It's one of the first books that I knew the title from the very beginning. We talk about love sometimes as really fluffy way, and it's sweet and red and pink hearts and all of that. But love is hard, and it takes work, and it is complicated. And there's a moment when the grandmother tells Nala that self-love is radical love. And to be able to love yourself in a world that is often telling you you're not beautiful enough, you're not smart enough, your skin tone is too dark, your hair texture is not right. To love yourself in the face of all that is radical. And that is the revolution, to love yourself and each other. So that's where I got the title from.
Amazing. I felt like,
but
it's
an acronym too.
It is. I know.
When I got that, I was like, what?
I know it is, and it was not on purpose. But once we realized that, we were like, oh, we have to keep this. We have to. But no, it wasn't on purpose. But so the acronym is LIAR, and Nala lies a lot, but that was not intended. We did not realize that was what the acronym would spell out until much later.
See, Renee is working on galaxy brain levels. She is like at another existence. Oh my gosh, this has been such a pleasure to talk to all of you today. What a wonderful panel. I want to thank everyone who joined us, everyone who tuned in and is attending North Texas Teen Book Festival. Thank you for being wonderful readers. And North Texas Teen Book Festival, such an incredible event every single year. Thank you, especially this year, for making it work, making us all be able to connect, even though we can't travel to Irving, Texas as much as we would love to. It's an incredible event, and we're so delighted to be here. So thanks again, you guys. See you later.